Nothing is sadder than what they did to Shakir, for real. I'm really hopeful that the work we're doing this weekend to show them that the characters don't need to be destroyed, I hope that it will not fall on deaf ears. They've erased all the characters' personalities, for those who are not sure what I'm talking about. They'd erased all of their entire backstories and personalities and filled them in with these really thrown together, quick stereotypes, extremely shallow. And it was for a plot rewrite, but they're open to the fact that, you know, we, as the lore community, are objecting strongly to it, and we want them to save these characters that deserve to have their real stories told, and hopeful that they will preserve as many as they can, because a simple plot rewrite does not mean you need to change every single character. Really hopeful they'll give Eddie his name back too, even. Don't forget to speak your mind in the comments. Whatever it makes you feel, I want to hear it. I think Lilith and Farlight deserve to as well. I think that's what we owe them, as fans, and with still 2 weeks to launch, I think we have the power to enact change. If you want it, of course. If you don't, you should say that too. Yeah, I want to hear it all. I really do. And yes, there are other things that need fixed, namely the servers and cross-server play, which I've also been championing, loud and proud, for what that's worth, all over the place. But that doesn't mean that this isn't important as well. The story is what Journey should be all about. Do what you want with the plot, just don't erase all of these characters' wonderful identities and backstories. So, sit back, relax. It's Asperian lore time on AFK with DangerGrey. So this is Eddie's original story. Hey, please leave me my pipe. Let my last day in this world be a little comfortable. Eddie shouted as he was thrown into the cage by the bearfolk guards. One of them reached down, snatched Eddie's leather pouch, and stuffed it into his own pocket. He also took the hyena's bamboo pipe, broke it in half, and casually threw it on the ground. He sat down with a nonchalant expression. After the guard left, he glanced around before stretching his arm out of the bars, straining to retrieve his broken pipe. The other occupant in the cage with him was a huge, powerful centaur who didn't even acknowledge his new cellmate. Instead, he kept kicking the bars with his front hooves and bellowed in anger. "You dishonor the warrior's code! Give us an honorable death this instant!" The proud centaur roared. Now, there is no us. Count me out. Why are you trying to get me killed? Eddie mumbled before scratching himself and stretching out on the floor. With his hands behind his head and his right foot resting on the folded left leg, he didn't seem like he was imprisoned waiting execution. "Filthy hyena, a carrion-eating coward! I suppose you want me to kneel before them and beg for mercy!" Eddie merely snorted derisively at this and shook his head. The leader of the bearfolk heard the shouted insults and approached. He sneered and raised his spear at the centaur warrior. "Is this what you want?" The sharp tip of the spear gleamed wickedly, reflecting silver light onto the centaur's face. His expression remained firm, but Eddie caught a flash of fear in the warrior's eyes that was swiftly replaced with fury and defiance. Finally, as if accepting his fate, the proud centaur closed his eyes, tightened his lips, and raised his head, awaiting his death. Eddie's eyes flicked over the centaur. "Killing the sacrifice now?" The hyena yawned. "Wonderful. Finish him quick so I can be the star of tomorrow's show." The leader hesitated for a moment. The guard behind him lowered his voice and reminded him,
Boss, it's customary to offer at least 2 sacrifices in the war ceremony.
He pretended to consider this for several seconds before spitting in the cage, stowing his spear, and swaggering off.
You talk too much.
The centaur growled menacingly. He appeared resentful at not being able to savor the honor of a warrior's death. On the other hand, he also breathed a sigh of relief. Eddie glanced up at his fellow prisoner, picked up his broken bamboo pipe, and toyed with it for a bit. Finally, he said, "All right, you big stallion, I saved your life. How about giving me a couple of hairs from your tail in exchange?" The centaur stared at him, expressionless. "Why the long face?" Eddie shook the bamboo pipe in his hand. "Just wait for me to fix this, and I'll show you a trick. How about it?" The centaur removed some of his hair and presented it to the hyena. His sigh was tinged with hopelessness. In the middle of the night, the whole bearfolk camp was quiet and still. Eddie suddenly snapped his fingers at the guards and woke them.
What are you up to?
One of them snarled fiercely in response. "Please, grant the last wish of a condemned man? Is that not our Mauler custom?" Eddie pointed at the guard's pocket. "There was some tobacco in my pouch you have there. Help a fella out?" The guard fished out Eddie's pouch, then opened it and sniffed the contents before tossing it to Eddie. "And a light? Oh, please don't get angry. I promise it's the last time I'll bother you." Eddie did his best to put on a fawning smile, then held out the bamboo pipe, newly mended with the horsehair.
Enjoy it while you can, coward.
The barefoot guard replied contemptuously, then handed Eddie a torch briefly. Eddie lounged against the iron cage as his pipe bowl glowed brightly. He puffed on his pipe and occasionally shook his head. Every once in a while, he tapped his bamboo pipe against the iron bars to shake out the ash. Gradually, a wonderful fragrance filled the air. So he's smoking a pipe and blowing it everywhere, right? And it's filling up with this fragrance. Okay. Soon after, the centaur warrior heard rustling, as if something was creeping towards them. Before he could get a better look, Eddie's hand darted out as he caught a little green snake from beside his feet. The hyena smiled wickedly, then motioned to the centaur to stay quiet, before turning around and tinkering with something. Remember, the centaur is in the cage with him. They're both caught by the bearfolk. When the guard's footsteps neared again, he turned around and resumed his usual indifferent demeanor. Time ticked slowly on, and the guard seemed a little drowsy in the middle of the silent night. He leaned on his spear, stretching himself while watching idly as the hyena raised the bamboo pipe to his mouth once again. To his surprise, Eddie didn't inhale smoke this time, as he had previously. Instead, he blew forcefully on the pipe. A slender, liquid-tipped bamboo sliver shot out, accompanied by a puff of ash, and plunged straight into the guard's throat.
Pipe! Jars!
The guard's mind was whirling with questions. He opened his mouth, but to his horror found himself unable to utter a sound. Soon he couldn't move his limbs, and eventually even consciousness began to fade away. He slowly toppled to the ground, sliding down the bars of the cage until he laid motionless on the floor. Eddie tried to measure the distance to the body. "Hey, stallion, the key is on his belt. You should be able to reach it," Eddie said, winking at the centaur. "See? Isn't this trick a lot more useful than your sense of honor?" A sliver of orange appeared across the horizon in the early morning light. As Eddie slid off the centaur's back, he slipped on a rock and almost fell on his backside in the process. You were really fast. They'll never be able to catch up with us now.
How did you...
The centaur asked hesitantly. It's just a little trick with smells and sounds. The Kapoor viper couldn't resist. Eddie fished out his pipe and tapped it on the ground, making a crisp clicking sound. And I never once said it wasn't a weapon, he said, again with a crafty smile. I should get going, Eddie said, squinting and looking around to get his bearings. By the way, Stallion, you owe me a favor. Don't go dying on me before you've paid the debt. The dead have no honor.
I understand,
He replied, looking down at the key he'd been kept firmly grasped in his hand. After several seconds, he quietly said,
Thank you.
Eddie didn't even look back, merely raising his hand in both response and farewell. The shadow cast by his languid figure stretched ever longer in the morning sun before he finally vanished into the wind and sand of the exiled lands. That was Eddie's real story, which has been replaced by this, for those unaware. This is what they have replaced. They changed his name to Odie and made his story just this. Like, what? Odie enjoys taking newspaper clippings from different cities in Asperia, from news and editorials to comic strips and jokes. What does that have to do with this character? That makes no sense in Asperia. Like, I'm not. There aren't even necessarily. I mean, there maybe are, but like, what? There probably aren't comic strips in newspapers regularly. Like, what? It's like they're not. Whoever wrote these isn't thinking about a fantasy world when they're writing them. After avoiding the, often wondered if he was lucky or his sins were just, they're just like. So, which ones do you guys like better? Do you like that long story or do you like these? Do you think that this is a better character? Because I think they could use the characters. So the characters were designed with stories in mind, with these stories, the long one that I just shared with you, and like they were drawn and after those stories were written, for the most part, and those stories are how they were created. So like they could use those stories and cut them into these little tales instead of destroying these characters' identities and personalities just to be fast. I think it was just to be expedient is the best that I can tell. And I just think that Asperia deserves to be saved, and I'm doing everything I can to try and save it. How did they ruin it? It's gone. It's just it's removed from the game. This is all that there is now. uh, yeah. Should we do another story?